I don't know where these videos are starting and stopping, but I'm filming. Last night I was working on these boards, so these are those same rough sawn boards. Do I have an example? Right here. So just rough sawn lumber, ran it through the planer. I did not have that to show, but I just ran it through a portable planer, the kind you get at Lowe's. And then I used my Festool track saw to cut one side of them dead straight. They were probably close enough to being straight for what I'm doing, but it cleans up that edge. And then I went to the table saw and ripped them to 5.5 inches. And then ran a router, I believe it had a 1/4 or 3/8 inch round over, and just rounded over the edge of those. So all I did was went through a lot of effort with rough sawn lumber to make some decking boards. So they are exactly the same as like a decking board you'd buy at Lowe's now, except they're not treated. Now some of them have a little bark on them, but that you won't see because I'm going to use the side that looks best. So these are going to be used again to do underneath those overhangs. I know I've probably repeated myself a bunch of times. But you can see up in those overhangs, that's what it is going to be duplicating, but up on that dormer part of the roof. So I'm going to get these pre-painted first, and then I'll cut them all to lengths, and then all I have to do is just touch up the end grain with paint, and for that I use solid stain. So I'm using an Olympic brand solid stain, and the color is the same as the house, all the trim, and that is Gibraltar Gray. But I believe Lowe's has switched their paints and the names of colors and all that, but you can still get solid stain in this color. I believe they just call it something different now. I don't have that answer for you. The paint is dry on the board, so I'm ready to roll. Here are the overhangs, so those boards will go from here over 2 inches over the overhang here, across the rafter tails on both sides. My boards are 1 inch thick, and then the decking that was already up here, the sheathing, is 3/8 inch thick. So once I put those, the edges kind of stand up higher, so I have to shim this out, and I just shimmed that where the head of the screws are. So need to take some measurements, then get to cutting. Time for an update. Got all the boards up. It's looking good. Time's about to run out on this card, so gotta make it brief. But all the boards are nailed up to overhangs on the eaves, and then, you know, up in there. You can see the flashing. Everything's painted, ready to go. And I'm prepping to put the metal down, so need to show you that. So this strip right here, and then the one up there, is just to kind of shim it out where you see these overhang boards stick up just a little bit. So where those are is where the screws will go. Same thing is occurring over here. It's just strips of, it was actually strips of OSB that I just ran. Could have put another whole sheet of OSB or something like that just to shim it out, but I'm just using the strips. So those are just made from plain down boards like these. So screws will go here, there, and then the ridge cap will screw down the top. So I need to put the black paper down now, which I have already done over here. And so I've got that black paper cut back along the edges to where when you're down on the ground you can't see the edge of that black paper. But let's just say you got to a high enough vantage point. I've got the top there painted too. It made a bigger difference on this steeper part where it's real easy, but all you have to do is stand out about that point and you can see this roof. So I just want to make sure that looks as good as possible. The other thing that I did is on the end grain of all of these little overhang pieces, you can see some of this green stuff. That is a copper-based wood preservative. So I applied that to the edges of all those to where if there's any kind of splashing from the main roof kind of onto the dormer roof, that it does not kind of get in there and cause any issues. So it's painted on a bunch of times and it's really soaked it in, so that'll just help out. That's in the case that there's even a problem begins. Most likely it would be fine even without it. So need to get the black paper down. Made some progress on the roof today. Chose not to film it because it involved someone else helping me, and it was just a lot to figure out, and I was not able to get an early start, so I got this side down. What I had to do first was finish this ridge cap that went from there over. So this has just been a piece of black paper draped over this for years. So this piece slips under that one about 6 inches. Then it comes underneath these decking boards and meets this last rafter right here. So this piece is tucked in, and then this piece will ride out flush with this other, with the roof on this section. I think it's going to be much cleaner looking. I kind of mocked it up and then went and looked at it from the ground. I also think this offers more protection. If it floated out here, it would be kind of opened up over this and then closed down. This is tighter down for any kind of splashing back when it's raining really hard. One thing that you will hear talked about on real houses, tiny houses, any kind of house, living, dwelling, is condensation occurring in the house. With smaller houses in general, doesn't matter whether it's on wheels or not, you end up with less volume in the air. So same amount of people in a smaller space, you can get more moisture in the air and temperature difference. So if it is cold outside, warm inside, you're breathing, you got your hot breath, you're making some spaghetti, something's boiling, that moist air is going to kind of migrate through your ceiling, and then when it hits this cold plywood up under here, you can end up with different condensation issues basically in your ceiling, and then you can have mold problems. That is if you do not have any kind of ventilation. So right here, you can see that's about a 1/4 inch gap. On a normal house, you cut about a 1 inch to either side of the ridge beam, and then you have ventilation down in the soffits of some sort, and then that air is able to flow up and out. So any kind of moisture that ends up in your ceiling is able to be kind of dried out through that ridge vent. So normally, like on a shingled roof, you'll see, you got your shingles coming up, and then it looks like there's a special, like, raised cap. And so you've got the ridge vent, and then you've got your shingles that are, I guess you call them cap shingles, which are basically just 3-tab shingles. Cut the 3 tabs, and they just overlap each other across. So what I'm going to be doing is relying on this 1/4 inch gap. It's a very small roof, very small void. And I think what I'm going to do, see over there that pink insulation foam, that's one of those 2-inch insulation foams. I think I'm going to have 3.5 inches of rafters. So I will put some sort of strip, so you can see my rafters. There's the ends of the rafters meeting the joist. I'll put a strip of wood here and here, running the full length side by side up against the underside of the sheathing. Then I'll place that rigid insulation up against that. That will create an air gap. That air gap will be what it'll act as baffles that you could buy, but that will let that airflow come up. And out of this vent, you've got the gap that goes underneath here. There'll be the gap underneath here. You're going to have enough airflow, so the hotter air will just rise naturally. It's just enough to dry it out, basically. It's not like all of a sudden, boom, it's wet in your ceiling. But over time, if it's completely trapped. I think that is it for now. Everything went smooth in the end, but it was tricky getting it. This was not completely square, but then you're dealing with this perfect, parallel lines, and the way it all goes together. It's meant to go together on something that's perfectly square. But I was able to kind of cheat it out as I worked across. The nice thing is this stuff is slightly stretchy. If you pull on it real hard, you can lengthen this. Imagine all you're doing is you're straightening this out, so it makes it a little longer. For example, to make sure that I had a nice even reveal of 1 inch hanging over the last decking board, it had to cause this to be askew a little bit. So it is attached up here. I left these 2 screws and these 2 screws off. Then after I got all these on, I went down there and I pulled this real tight. And then when I pulled that tight, I straightened those out a little bit down there, and it made this, the fact that this is overhanging the decking boards underneath it, slightly less noticeable. I mean, it's barely noticeable at all that it's not a perfect dead straight. And then down there, by the time I got down there, I was like, straightening it out as best I could. By the time I ended up down there, I ended up with a nice even amount that needed to be cut off the last piece. So I think that would be it. Tomorrow, I'll be working on this. I'm going to try to get an earlier start. Strawberry picking with family slowed me down today. See you tomorrow. Let's go have a look. Just finished the roof. It only took 7 years. We'll go up this A-frame. I think we'll be able to see more. This ladder is 12 feet tall, A-frame, aluminum. It's a cool ladder. So you can see the new stuff, shiny. The far roof was on there. Obviously this one was on there. I can see sighting down. My ridge is nice and straight. And I was getting someone to help me. I was up on top and asking if this was in the center. It's off a little bit. So it threw a slight kink in there, but maybe some bird, a hummingbird at this angle will be the only one that gets mad about that. I'll know it though, and I'll think about it. But once you start attaching this stuff, it's kind of tricky to go repositioning stuff because the hole in this is there. The hole that goes into the decking is there. So there's not a lot you can do about that. But you can't tell anything, you know, from pretty much anything but right up here. So this hole right here, this passes all the way through the whole house, through the whole ridge. So that'll be where, you know, it can kind of vent out there. And of course you got this too, you know, heat can come up and then flow out of those. Very excited. So let me see if there's anything I can tell you. This is going to conclude this video. This was a major thing to get to. It is incredible to not have this thing be in black paper. And it's just so nice looking now. Yeah, I like how it's dark up in there. Let me see what it does when you do that. Check this side. You know, I like my flashing. So now you can kind of see what the flashing is for. You can imagine when it's raining, rain hit this and it can kind of splash over there. So there's that hole where this penetrated through the roof. So that is just to get that water going away from that. Ends of all these have been treated with wood preservative to where they don't eventually rot out, or at least it outlasts me. That's all I really care about. These pieces right here transition nicely into the ridge cap. That was pretty tricky. It involved just using the cutoff wheel and kind of just fine-tuning it. Got all the screws nice and lined up. So down here, how I get those screws all lined up is just take a speed square and you just measure up with a speed square, you know, and then with these, I've got those strips. So those were 27 inches from the bottoms where those strips were. And then this was 4 inches up just onto the two decking boards. I guess I just got it wrong with my measurement. I was trying to guess like where these screws were. I didn't know how far down they were, and these are probably a little off center. But again, you're never looking at things from this angle. I've probably already mentioned it, but that's just a reaction from the water running off that black paper. But this is from doing it for years. You know, if you just put it up there temporarily, and in a couple days or something, we're putting your metal up, and it happened, you're not going to get that. That was from years of it. And it won't take years to do it, but I mean, after months, you know, you'll start to get marks like these, and then this is from, you know, from it happening a long time. And then I think there's some actual like rusty looking spots here. Not concerned about that. I actually kind of like it. I can imagine this whole thing kind of, you know, more grayed out to this type of a galvanized look, and rust spots and stuff, you know, looks good. But, you know, it's not going to like rust through like some bucket of water with just a bucket of water. How something like that may rust. It just gets wet and the water's off of it, and then it's metal, so it's going to dry off pretty quick. I guess that is it for this video. I don't want to say I apologize, but this was a tricky part of this project to get like good footage of. You know, it's a slant. I don't want to let my camera fall off. A lot of things are really slow, so I didn't want to be starting the camera and having to go back down, just turn the camera off and then work on something for half an hour or leave the camera running for that long. So I just wanted to get through this part. You know, I felt just as dumb as you're going to feel when you're putting it up. It's just kind of like you don't know if you're doing it right. But in the end, you just get up there, you try to get it as square as you can, and screw it down. It's kind of tricky, these screws, you know, you got to like screw down, and then it pulls down the wood, and then normally what I do is I back out, and then I run it back down with it held in the position. If you use this type of metal, these type of screws, you'll just see what I'm talking about when you get there. But it's good stuff. I like it. I am not a huge fan of all these houses with these like new painted aluminum that look like standing seam roofs. I don't have a problem with them, but like I wouldn't like the way that would look on here, and a lot of people do that. I think it just looks too, I don't know, too engineered, and I just don't think it would fit the house. Like, I think something like this fits the house. This looks like a common material. It's not trying to be fancy. You know, it doesn't involve all. It's not a system. It's just some roofing, and you can buy some ridge cap. So it doesn't have like fascia and soffit. It's kind of like built into it. It's not a bunch of broken angles and all that kind of stuff. So I really like the look. So that's it. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to check out my other channel, Homemade Home, Homestead Craftsman as well. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to post these videos on those other channels. I don't want to not show it at all on those other channels, but you know, I've kind of got a lot of channels now, and they're all sort of semi-closely related. So not sure how I want to address that long term. I have thoughts to do build some of these tiny houses to sell. They'd be different than this one, but sort of in the same, I think, same type of designs, but built more production friendly than what I'm doing now. Everything now is just super duper custom. So I would like to incorporate, this is sort of, I call this the runway version of a tiny house for me, and then I will I think take elements from this and then add that to something that's a little bit more standardized, and then come up with production friendly custom things for the interiors. I don't know, it's just a dream I have right now. I have this one, you know, set up over there. I have a great place to build over there too, so I could have one of these. I even thought to build a building large enough to be able to work on something like this on the inside, so that would be really nice. Not have to be concerned about light, the temperature, rain, or anything. You could have some kind of scaffolding. You could have something that goes back and forth over tops of them to where you can work on the roofs without actually having to get on the roof. But I don't know, and I don't know what the interest would even be in that type of thing, because I mean, you see these houses range from $10,000 for kind of dinky stuff, and less than that even. But you know, once you get into something that you can kind of actually call something sort of house-ish, up to, it was one guy, I think he spent like $200,000 on his, but that was just material costs. That was one that he owned himself. He built himself, but he spent, I think it was over $200,000 building it. And I see people buying these things for $70,000, $100,000. So I wouldn't be building some cheap one. You know, I would want to build something that was really nice, and I don't know if the market's there. The whole tiny house thing, I'm not like super into it as a sort of like the overall community of it. And my reason behind it is just simply because I thought it was a cool thing to do. I don't have any kind of environmental reasons. I don't have problems with big houses. I own a bunch of big houses, real houses. I just think it was cool. I think a lot of people try to apply a lot of reasons onto things they just think are cool. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing something just because you think it's neat. But at the same time, you could do something strictly because you think it is cool, and then develop other interests in why you're doing it later, and that's fine too. Yeah, I think that tiny houses are a very narrow kind of like market, as far as like when I started building this thing. I think I was 24. Now I'm 33, and and I'm married and have a child. So I mean, it has changed big time for me. And back then, I was just thought this was a fun thing to do, and I was gonna do it and keep it like, you know, my parents' driveway type deal, like probably a lot of people do, and some relative or a friend or something like that. So it got put on hold for a long time. And then the funny thing is, the situation I'm in now, which is not very tiny house friendly, has actually presented me with the opportunity where it's a better fit than I think it probably even was back then. What I ended up doing back then was got into buying houses, renovating them to be rentals. So this just didn't fit well anymore. I just didn't feel like it was a good idea to be spending time working on this when I could be working on another house that's going to make money. But now I can get this thing set up. It can be this fun little place that we go. You know, I can live in it all the time. We can have stuff that stays in this all the time. So this house would have its own dishes and blankets and clothes and, you know, everything, to where basically you could just leave your house and your car with very, very minimal items. Just come down to where this is going to be set up. I'll have a second shop set up. I've got, you know, the land to do things on, the land on this side of the street as well, family. So it's kind of funny. It's the life sort of took me away from it being a good fit and then back to it being a good fit. So I think that's one thing to consider if you're going to be building one of these things. It's kind of a big commitment. Financially, this has not been that expensive for me. I think I have spent probably less than, I think I've probably spent $3,000 or $4,000 on this whole thing. Probably at most. I may have only spent like $2,000 on this. The most expensive thing being the shingles. The windows, $0. Most all of the plywood. My dad had a bunch of it. I got it from him. I bought a bunch of 2x4s for, like, that I built the whole thing out of for 50 cents a piece. They had nothing wrong with them. The trailer that it's built on, I paid $100 for it. I mean, I've barely spent anything on this. The metal roofing is $15 a sheet and then $20-some a sheet. So a couple $100 really, probably only on the roofing, $400 maybe. All the ridge cap we had for some reason. So yeah, you can get away with building something. It doesn't have to look like some little piece of junk and not spend that much money if you stretch it out over 10 years and collect up the materials. But all right, that's that. I will see y'all next time. Let me know in the comments kind of feedback on anything. I'm not talking about just a pat on the back, keep it up, do it, you're doing a good job. But if you got any ideas, if you have a sort of ideas of the way the video should go, the channel should go, your feedback on what you think about the idea of making some of these things to sell them. Are any of y'all out there actually like people who would truly be in the market to spend, you know, $75,000, $100,000 for something like this? You know, when I say that I've spent how much money I've spent on it, if I was building this to sell, it would cost a whole lot more, because you wouldn't be waiting around till the one day you find 2x4s for 50 cents. These materials that this thing was built out of were materials that were acquired years before this even became an idea in my head, just because they were there and we just got them. When I say we, I mean me and my dad. So, you know, if you were to make something like this, it would be, you know, much more like a job. It would involve getting, acquiring materials much faster, so you'd have to just buy them, paying full price, everything. I don't know how much you'd spend actually building it, but I wouldn't do something like this unless it was really worth my time, just because I've got a family now, so I can't just do stuff strictly out of novelty. It's got to make sense on some level. So that's it. Greatly appreciate you all watching. I'm enjoying being back on this project. I'm sure it's going to be fun fooling around with all y'all down in the comments. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.